triggers a lot of people. And it triggers them because of what they've learned, how they've learned, because our need, supposed need, I would add, to blame, to pass current conditions and forward-moving conditions, the future, on events that can be easily misconstrued, misunderstood, and lost in archives and libraries that general people do not get to. A colleague of mine, Professor Fred Perot, I highly recommend people follow him on Facebook, and I think he has a podcast now. And just because you follow somebody doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they say. It's the idea that if you follow people who have studied these subjects, have done research, have done archaeological expeditions out and around the Mediterranean, such as Fred Perot has, they've looked at history from a lot of different perspectives. Where most understand it from the few things they remember, maybe, from learning it in elementary, middle, high school, which is going to vary based on where you live, based on what decade, when you were learning, you know, the climate at that time, the cultural, political climate. It's going to vary based on whether you went beyond what was in the book or you stuck to what is in the book. It depends on what textbook was used. That history is going to be based on what social media you might be on. Because if you forgot your history from elementary, middle, high school, then you might rely on the internet. And then it comes to, well, what sociological groups, what social communities you are part of, and how they believe that history. Does history have facts? Yes. The thing is, when in elementary, middle, and high school, you have to condense hundreds of years into 1-hour lectures. You have to try to explain this whole entire situation. And this is true for history, it is true for explaining a religion in a religious studies course, it is true across the board. If you have this big, complex thing with lots of variables, and you need to try to explain it, the second you drop any variable, the possibility of a bias is going to grow. It doesn't mean there absolutely is a bias. It means that the possibility of bias is going to grow. The possibility of interpretation becoming misinterpretation. And that shows up because of condensing. It shows up because of language. One of my favorite lectures at the beginning of the course is, that variation of the benefits and the problems of oral versus written language. And through that process, we talk about the influence of whether the story comes alive, going to a reenactment event, or going to physically hear these stories and how they're told. But then how every person might tell them differently. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. perched in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. How we hear something presented to us can influence our understanding. So before I keep going on that tangent, which I can talk about for many minutes, many hours probably. I don't know how long I could go if I really delved into it. I know it's an hour plus lecture if I want it to be. But let's go back to this story of Columbus, or perhaps more so this story of Mercia, of America. And when I say America, I do not mean just the United States. I don't just mean the US, Canada, and Mexico. By America, I'm thinking the Americas, North and South. Fred, in his post on Facebook, mentions, the Vikings, the Templars, all these different groups, that there is ample evidence for them being in the Americas prior to 1492. It is very ample evidence. Some people still do not like it. Some people try to exaggerate it and make it much longer. There's questions about even just how long ago other groups, not just North Asian, but the Southern Asian and the Polynesians, and how all those islands were discovered or rediscovered, and people went from one place to another. And genetics is helping us understand that a little bit. Genetics is also opening up a whole lot more questions. Genetics is also still a new field in that sense. It's confusing at times when you actually start looking into the history and you realize nothing is cut and dry. Recently, another part that comes up is how it is Columbus who came and destroyed Americas, meaning destroyed the people who were already here. And then this goes to the Europeans and the British and everyone. And there absolutely are instances of that, from blankets to straight out killing people. And again, though, we have to look at this history of conquering. It doesn't belong to just one group. Some of the tribal groups that get brought up when talking about the discovery of the Americas are tribes that were long gone, even by 1000 of the Common Era. By the way, Common Era is the same thing if you have more of the Christian influence. It's the AD. For my religious studies class, and for most modern fields of study, we use BC for before the, or BCE for the before the Common Era, and CE for the Common Era. The question, though, isn't just about trying to figure out who we blame or which history is right. The old saying now, history is written by those who have won. And that is true. But history is also discovered about those who haven't. We can learn so much from archaeological digs, from the people who were writing what was happening. Thing is, we have to to realize our own biases when we do that as scientists, as archaeologists, anthropologists, as scholars. And our own biases become the biases of the people who read the material. Because again, you're taking this massive, large amount of information and you're trying to present a story, a podcast, a news article. And sometimes that podcast or news article is actually being paid for by a particular viewpoint as well. So do we protest Columbus Day? Do we protest Thanksgiving? I don't know if that's really the question to ask. I think the question in all of this is, one, how do we want to express unity, diversity, compassion, loving kindness as we move forward? Two, how do we want to be better than whoever it is who did whatever it was in the past? And then, what are the actual actions? I mean, this is just like any other goal-setting program. You know, you've made mistakes in the past. You weren't perfect. You need to own up to it a little, but you also don't need to go into the judgmental blaming thing. It's awareness. Being mindful of the variables, of the processes that led to something happening. And letting go of that harsh judgment and blame game. In our own lives, we have to say, okay, maybe I have done ... and it may have hurt ... but there were reasons I did it at the time. I may not have known better. Maybe I even did know it wasn't ideal, but it was the only thing that I could find. It was the only option that I saw available. When you're paid to try and find a route, probably around America, as it had already been discovered, it's what you do. And so then we have to say, well, who are the people we want to work for? And rather than just go after, again, judging and blaming, what can we do ourselves? How can we act in a way that whether a person speaks any language, is of any culture, follows any religion, how can we create a dialogue? How can we find what unites us? Embrace the diversity that makes us unique and different, and move forward. And in that process, one other very important thing is not to cancel that history. When I taught engineering ethics for a couple semesters, one of the interesting lectures, we were talking about John Stuart Mill and Bentham and others, and it was the idea that what becomes what we think of as common sense, when we stop knowing why, can stop being common. And just as we've taken hundreds and thousands of years and narrowed it down to one page in a history book, doesn't mean the rest of it isn't important. why should we learn about Hitler? Why should we learn about wars and conflicts and conquests? And why should we be aware of people in history, good or bad? Because, by the way, that good and bad can change. Why do we cancel what someone who once was seen as good has to say because they've done something bad? By the way, you'd be canceling a lot of people. In fact, if you followed Gnostic teachings, you might even decide that you should cancel Jesus. Ooh, did I just go there? There are stories that when he was young, he purposely set fire to a house just so he could work a miracle to put out the fire and save the people. If you know somebody's done something bad, and this comes back to that idea that no one is perfect. Confucius really didn't have the best family life. Does that mean we cancel him? Do we cancel Columbus? Do we cancel these people in a way that we no longer are given the opportunity to learn? One might say, oh, we'll keep all that stuff in a museum. Don't put it out. It shouldn't be on social media. It should be, blocked. This idea of exploring history. Hide it away. It's not important. The thing is, it is. Because otherwise, that which should be common sense, loving kindness, compassion, embracing diversity, finding unity, things that we think of as common sense, they stop being common when we stop being exposed to that which makes us question the world around us and question the reality we've been part of. Is it healthy to dislike Christopher Columbus and the discovery of America by him? It can be. As long as it makes you or lends to you delving deeper and discovering more of the rich history and understanding the variables. But again, we're condensing so much into one news article. Living in this world is complicated. Living in this world is very complicated. It is a mess of knowledge and thoughts that can contradict one another. Situations that are exceptions to rules that we follow. Pressures to do one thing or another thing because of what we want, what we desire, what we need, or what we think we need. Trying to figure out who does know better. And then even questioning them. And getting to this point where we just want somebody who can tell us what we should think, how we should act. The thing is, only we ultimately can decide that. In a lot of Eastern teachings, there is no good or bad. There's positive and negative. There are things that are better for us or better for others, and things that are worse for us and worse for others. But even like in understanding karma, you realize that it's not cut and dry. Have you ever thought you were doing something nice for somebody, but that person didn't understand it as such? Or did something bad once happen to you, but ultimately that bad thing led to something wonderful? If that bad thing hadn't happened, would the wonderful thing have happened? For as long as there have been mankind, we've essentially competed in some way, shape, or form over resources. Sometimes that competition has been violence. Sometimes it has been psychological games, emotional games. Sometimes it has been making hard decisions. There's so many people in your group, and you only have so much food. And there are people who are much older who can't really participate. Making decisions about how to grow your group, your community, your society, it isn't easy. I mean, there are times where different political systems tend to be better and tend to be worse. I have my own views on that. They're not entirely different from Fred Perot's, but they are different. Uniquely so. Or at least I think so. But even in understanding those different views, it's the idea that it's not easy. It's easier the more you know. Well, maybe. Also can be harder. Because now you have to work with others who don't know as much and probably won't ever know as much. I'm at a stoplight. I'm going to turn off the video. But I want you to think, whether it's Columbus or anyone or anything else, how does knowing whatever version of the stories you know, how can that version help you? How can it lead you to grow? How can it help you know how you want to be, how you want society to be? Not in a way that blames, not in a way that judges, but in a way that will promote actions that support